Hi everybody, this is Amber with Sweet Tooth Cakes. I wanted to do a quick tutorial on how I made my Thanksgiving turkey cake. This was the first time making a cake like this. I had a lot of fun with it and I hope you guys try to do it also, and I hope you guys have tons of fun. So the first thing I did was I started with a 10-inch round. The cake flavor I chose was pumpkin spice, and then I used a cinnamon buttercream. I did cut off all the caramelization around the 10-inch, and then I used a 8-inch dome and put it on the top. Don't forget to cut that caramelization off as well. For this cake, make sure that you do have a picture of what you are going to be carving next to it. So in this case, I had my phone next to me with a Thanksgiving turkey on it. And go ahead and just start the carving process. This actually took me, I think, 2.5 hours to carve this cake. And don't throw away your cake scraps because you can use those later for stuffing. You don't have to do this. This is just what I chose to do around the sides of my cake because, of course, you know, what's a turkey without the stuffing? So carve your top off, kind of make it a rounded edge. Don't forget to trim your sides so they're a little bit more narrow. And then, of course, carve in the indents for where the neck is and the legs of the turkey. So just keep on carving the cake, and if you decide that you need to add more cake or you want it a little more plump in certain places, some of those cake scraps that you put aside, make sure you use only the softer pieces, not the pieces that are caramelized, just because you don't want that kind of in your cake. This is actually the same recipe that you use for a cake pop. You take your cake scraps, kind of crumble them up into little pieces, and then add some buttercream to them just till you get a nice texture where it's moldable. I call this cake putty. So what I used this for was the breast and then the back rear end of my turkey where my drumsticks are going to kind of come together. I just wanted it to be a little bit more plumpy because I wanted it to be as realistic looking as possible. So go ahead and get your turkey to the way that you would like it to look, and then go ahead and start crumb coating it. For this cake, it was a very moist cake, so I actually had to take a little bit of my buttercream, and here's a trick for you guys also. Take a little bit of your buttercream, and if you have any thinner pieces of cake that are kind of falling apart or a little bit too moist, and you have like an issue with your cake kind of ripping on you, I just placed it in the microwave for about 5-10 seconds, depending on how high your microwave goes, and kind of softened it a little bit. It just made it so much easier to put the crumb coat on my cake. I did use this for this part of the cake, and also when I did the drumstick, it was such a helpful tip for me. So once you get your crumb coat on, put your cake in the fridge for about 5-10 minutes, just until it's like not sticking to you when you touch your cake. And you want to go ahead and start with the legs. The reason you want to crumb coat your cake is, one, to hold in the crumbs, yes, but then two, it just makes the final coat, putting it on, just so much easier for you because everything's kind of already held into place for you. It's kind of like the cake glue. So for me, for my cake, I went ahead and used the 8-inch round, cut it in half, and then cut it in half again, and use that for the drumsticks. I have a huge family, so I wanted more cake versus Rice Krispie treats or fondant on the sides. I wasn't happy with the length of the drumsticks, so I went ahead and used cake putty again to kind of round out the back piece, and also to just make it a little bit longer because I wanted the proportions to be just right, because I also had to add the wing on the back, but I just felt like the drumsticks needed to be a little bit bigger. So again, crumb coat your drumsticks, let it set up before you add your final coat. And when you do add your final coat, make sure that you have, if you're making any kind of rounded cake, you want to make sure that you have a piece of acetate paper or a piece of flexible plastic. It just kind of helps you shape the cake so much more easier and smoother. So I did use my spatula at first just to kind of get the buttercream where I wanted it to be, and then I took my piece of acetate paper, and you'll notice right here how smooth it got the breast area and just all the roundness of this cake to be. It is such a helpful tool. I got mine off Amazon. I think it came in 4 different strengths. One was a little bit softer, and the final one I think was a little bit harder, and I think I got 4 of them, and I think I only paid $4. You can also find this at Hobby Lobby and Michael's. I just like Amazon. So for this part, after I was done with the final coat, I did start the wings. I went ahead and took a ball of fondant, rolled one side a little bit thinner than the other, left the other side plump, bent it in half, made that little sharp edge, and then put my where the muscle is for your wing, kind of in the back part, and then that little slit that kind of comes out of the top part, and then texture. You want to make sure you have a picture so that you can get the wings to look as lifelike as possible. I did use later on in the video a piece of shelf liner to texture my wings and my Dresden tool, but I put them on the cake before I did that because I just wanted to make sure they're the right size first before I wasted too much time. So for my fondant, I did use a lot of ivory food coloring and rolled it out, make sure there's no air bubbles. Spritz your cake with either water or vodka just to help the fondant stick to it a little bit better. Sometimes if you're using ganache, you don't have to do this, but I just like to do it just to assure, that my fondant sticks very well to my cake. Now, because this had protruding pieces, for example, the drumsticks kind of sticking out of this cake, when you're putting your fondant on, first start with the top, make sure you get all the air out from the top of it, and then kind of lift your fondant around the edges and push it towards your cake before pushing down where the tops of the drumsticks and any more protruding pieces go. Otherwise, if you don't do this, you can actually kind of rip your fondant. One, the weight of the fondant pulls, and two, you don't want it to be kind of already sticking to the cake, and then when you go push it up, it just rips it. So for this particular cake, I knew I was going to be decorating the bottom end, so I wasn't too particular on how perfect it looked. Of course, if you were just going to leave it as is, you want to make sure that you do smooth out all around the edges of the bottom of the cake. For me, this just wasn't super important. For the texture of this, and it's very hard to tell in the video, I actually used a bit of shelf liner. Usually, my go-to was like an orange peel, or an orange bag, because it has those kind of crisscrosses. But I did attempt this on this one, and I just don't think it gave it the right look. The shelf liner was just such a better texture, more like turkey skin to me. The orange bag would actually be better if you were doing, like, for example, a snake cake or some kind of reptile type of deal, because it has those crisscross shapes in it. It would have been perfect. So now I'm attaching the wings, and I just used a little bit of water. You can also use vodka for this. I took my Dresden tool once I was happy with the size and how they were placed, and I kind of gave it some more lifelike appearance, put some little marks in there, and then I did use my shelf liner also one more time. You just want to make sure that you get the cake as textured as you would like it before you start the painting process, because if you try to go back after painting it and you put that shelf liner on there, that would just be a huge mess, and we don't want that. So for my first coat, I did use a lot of ivory food coloring. I believe I used a little tiny drop of brown and vodka. And remember, your vodka does evaporate fast, so kind of work quickly. Make sure you're going with your brush in the same direction throughout the whole cake. And then after I was done painting my first layer, you do want to let your layer dry all the way, otherwise your paint can become a little bit tacky. Then I took that same vodka, the same ivory, and that drop of brown, and I added a little bit more brown and a copper color to it because I wanted it to look more like a roasted turkey. So I took that color, darkened it up, and then I went ahead and did the legs, the top of the wings, the turkey breast on the top, kind of where it's closer to the oven. You kind of get that more baked, darker baked appearance. And then for the bones, I almost forgot to put the bones in this cake. That would have been a funny mistake. Anyway, so you take your bones, roll out a piece of fondant, and then you want to make sure that you are kind of indenting with a ball tool, kind of where just to make it more bone-like, just like a turkey leg. So look at your picture again, make sure you're doing this. And then when I inserted them, I didn't want to just attach them and have them kind of half and half hanging out. I wanted to take my ball tool, stick it in the bottom of the legs. That way it was halfway indented into the cake so that it just looked more realistic, because I was going for as realistic of a cake as possible. Take your paint in whatever color you would want. Make sure you do darken those bones, because when you put it in the oven, yes, they're white, but then when you pull them out, they kind of have a baked look. Now for this part, I'm just again adding a little bit more darkness. I had to keep doing this in layers because I didn't want the colors to kind of pool, because the cake gets a little bit tacky, a little bit sticky. So make sure again it's dry all the way. Just take your time, do your layers, look at your picture, take a break. Just make sure that you do take the time to let your cake dry completely before you add the next layer. And the thing that actually made this cake look the most realistic was after the final layer was dry, after I got the colors where I wanted them to be, I took some cocoa powder on a dry brush, kind of a thick, round, dry brush, and dabbed kind of and down and kind of patted it just until you get the texture that you want. Putting this dry cocoa powder on this kind of tacky cake does kind of pull just a tad bit at the fondant, which is perfect for this type of cake because it actually made it look like a real seasoned turkey. I was so impressed with how this cake came out. This was my first time making it. I really hope you guys get a chance to try it. It was so much fun. Now here's where the cake scraps came into place. I took my leftover cake scraps, laid them out on the counter with my cutting board, chopped them into squares. I didn't really want just crumbled pieces of cake. I took some Mike and Ike's. I cut out the red, the yellow, and the green, kind of like your celery, onions, and red peppers or whatever you put in your stuffing. It's totally up to you what colors you use. I diced them up, threw it in there, mixed it up. I made some lettuce leaves out of some green and yellow fondant, kind of dyed it together till I got the right look. Painted that again with a tiny bit of yellow, spread it around my cake, and then I spread my stuffing around, and it just came out fabulous. I hope you guys enjoy this video. Write a comment if you have any questions, and have a great day. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe.